Great. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day or afternoon, wherever you are. It is a very bright afternoon here in Nairobi. It's quite sunny indeed. My name is Richard Kipngeno, the Birding and Membership Officer at Nature Kenya, the East African Natural History Society. And it is a great privilege to welcome each and every one of you who have managed to join us today for our members virtual talk that will be presented by Professor John and Margaret Cooper about animal forensics in wildlife, about conservation and animal welfare. So for the new invited guests who have joined us today, we encourage you to also become members of Nature Kenya. We walk together the conservation journey as we enjoy all the benefits that goes with it. So just a few information to give about before we roll down our presentation is that I request all the participants to remain muted as the presentation goes on. And also, should you have any concern, any question, you can always drop them in the chat box. The presenter will be able to handle all the questions after the presentation. And also is to let you know that the presentation is recorded and we will be able to upload it in our YouTube channel after this presentation. So you can always revisit it later. Just a quick short bio about our presenters today. The Coopers are a husband and wife team from the United Kingdom. And something just to mention with them is that they are very enthusiastic conservationists, very inspiring indeed, and are one of our active members. They will tell us more about them as they introduce and lay ground for our talk. So without taking much time, I will welcome our speakers for today, Professor John and Margaret Cooper. The floor is yours. Karibuni sana.
Asante sana, Bwana Richard. We're delighted to be here today. It is a great pleasure to be speaking to Nature Kenya, to the East African Natural History Society, because we first became members over 50 years ago when we were in Kenya in 1970. And we very much admire all the work of the East African Natural History Society in all three of the East African countries. We have on our car outside a sticker that says Nature Kenya. And people may say, well, nothing special about that, even in Norfolk, England. But what is special is that it says Nature Kenya 1994. And that is because in 1994, I'm holding up the program now, we, John and Margaret Cooper, had just been evacuated from the genocide in Rwanda, were given a very welcome home in Nairobi. And we were asked very soon after escaping the genocide to give a talk about our work with the mountain gorillas. So this original program and the sticker on the car bring back happy, but also rather sad memories. But we are very grateful for this opportunity to speak. And we're also grateful that Nature Kenya, for some years now, has provided us with literature for our workshops. And you'll see some pictures of those workshops in due course. So we're going to move on from there, and here we go.
And we're going to start with a small supplementary introduction. Richard, thank you for your introduction. And we're going to say that we are John and Margaret Cooper. We're a husband and wife, a veterinary pathologist and lawyer team. We work together. We've been involved with forensic science since at least the 1980s. And in 2019, we were given an award, as you can see on the left here. We're rather well dressed for the Coopers. And we were given the award that from the Faculty of the Forensic and Legal Medicine, and made fellows of their faculty, which is within the Royal College of Physicians.
But we actually feel much happier, as Margaret has implied, on the right-hand side here. And this is a picture taken 2 years ago, almost exactly, at Impala Research Centre in Kenya. And it was the last workshop that we ran. Hopefully there'll be more next year. And we are with 3 of our East Central African colleagues from left to right, from Rwanda, from Kenya. And this was the end of the workshop, so you can see we're rejoicing. But that perhaps is our natural habitat and where we feel most at home.
At the moment, our friends are saying that we ought to be safely retired, tucked up in this little cottage here in England, and just relaxing. But that is not true by any means. And if it wasn't for COVID, we would be back in East Africa, and we would be traveling around in the way that we really prefer, teaching and training, including in forensics, but on the top of a 4x4 vehicle somewhere in Africa.
And as we're Wazee, that's Swahili for older people, we like to show off that we can still stand on a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Well, this has proved a bit difficult during COVID lockdown, but it's fairly easy to find a Land Rover here in Britain, the picture on the left. So we're getting a bit of practice here. This was taken a month or 2 ago, not standing on it, but sitting on it with our 2 young friends in Shropshire, England. But on the right-hand side is a reminder to our East African friends, and it's super that so many are joining us today, that we do try and keep fit. I have a bicycle, as you can see, and I go bird watching, Richard. You can see my binoculars there. So I would welcome joining your bird watching trips when we come to Nairobi next. But also we do a lot of walking. And the picture bottom right there, we thought would be quite nice. It's Margaret in local woodland, because any of our East African colleagues and friends who have never been to Britain or Northern Europe during the autumn or the fall, as the North Americans call it, will not necessarily appreciate how beautiful the countryside is, even though of course, sad to relate, it's leading to winter.
But during our lifetime, we have spent a lot of time migrating. We've often followed the routes that show on the map on the left, which shows the migratory routes of the birds from Europe right down to the south of Africa. And we have followed these routes on the eastern side, in particular, always returning to East Africa. But in the course of the years, we have lived in a number of terrains and environments. Next to the map is the savannas of East Africa, which give us much pleasure when we live there. And on the right-hand side are the Virunga Mountains of Rwanda, where we lived at the foot of the mountains when we were working with the mountain gorillas. And then we are also lucky enough to work in the desert. This is a desert ecology station on the picture on the left, and where my husband was the director. And then for later on, we moved to the Caribbean, where my husband was professor of veterinary pathology at the University of the West Indies in the veterinary school. But we have always felt that if you're actually living abroad, it's very much different from simply traveling abroad.
But we must now get into forensics. And first of all, and we apologize for those of you who are familiar with all this terminology, but we want to give a sort of basic background. The word forensic comes from the Latin forum forensis, which I won't go into, but essentially it means relating to, as you can see, a court of law and legal processes. And then we can use that same adjective forensic to apply to forensic science, forensic this or that or whatever as an adjective. So that's the origins of the word forensic. We tend, John and Margaret Cooper, to use it in that broader sense of investigation, the forensic method, carrying out an investigation really well, taking the right samples, making the right observations, identifying that bird correctly, Richard, whatever it happens to be. So although today we'll be talking about forensics very much in the context of animals and the law, we are mindful of the fact that the forensic method is something that people can use in different walks of life. Now, one of the things that we want to emphasize throughout this is the international and interdisciplinary nature of forensic work. We've called this animal forensics, wildlife forensics, whatever. There's a veterinary forensics as well, which tends to be rather more orientated towards domesticated animals. We prefer the term animal because that can be wild animals, captive animals, whatever. The top picture here on the left, those of you who are in Kenya will probably recognize the United Kenya Club. We are members of that, and indeed the tie I'm wearing is the UKC, the United Kenya Club. We're very proud of belonging to it because it was the first ever multiracial club in Kenya colony back in 1946. But that's not the real reason for showing you the picture. You have 4 people there, 4 people from 3 different countries, from the United Kingdom, from the United States, and from Kenya. And you've got 3 disciplines. You've got what we would call a lady lawyer, that's Margaret Cooper. And then we have Susan Underkoffler next to her, who is a very experienced crime scene investigator and wildlife conservationist. And then we've got Professor Georgia Wheaty on the right, who's Kenyan, and a rather aging John Cooper at the background. George and I are part of the same discipline. We're both veterinary surgeons, veterinarians, but slightly different specialities. So this is really to emphasize how important this international side is and the variety of people who are involved. And while we're talking East Africa, we would just like to pay tribute to some of the East Africans who are now working in the field of forensics and have worked with us, and we wish them well in their endeavors. You'll be seeing pictures of some of them, such as Laban and Njoroge. We'd like to refer to Isaac Mulenga, who's actually from Zambia, but who is studying in Nairobi. There are others who will be mentioned in the lecture. We want to refer to Moses Otiende and the Kenyans who are working on DNA. The late Mamoon Jenabi, our dear friend who sadly died a few months ago, and other colleagues in the Kenya Wildlife Service, the Institute of Primate Research, and the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in Kenya, and of course many others in both in Tanzania, in Uganda, and in Rwanda. And the 3 pictures of the 2 ladies and Alan Gunn on the right is to remind those who are listening that you don't have to be a veterinarian, you don't have to be a lawyer to be interested in working in this subject. These are colleagues who've made great contributions, and some of you may know Alan Gunn's book, Essential Forensic Biology. What we're doing in this lecture is to give you essentially an introduction to animal forensics, but orientating it very much to, as the title suggests, to conservation and to animal welfare. And we would say from the outset that John and Margaret Cooper are interested in the methods that are used. We believe strongly in the judicial process and how important it is that justice is done, that innocent people are found innocent, even if guilty people are found guilty. But we are therefore not involved in chasing criminals. We are involved in trying, through our teaching particularly, to improve forensic methods.
So let's look a little closer at animal forensics, which of course is the core of our lecture. Animals can be involved in a forensic case in a number of ways. They can cause an injury or an incident, and they can be the victim of an injury or incident. But there are 2 other more interesting ways in which they may be involved. They may provide information. Maybe they're at the crime scene, but not actually the subject of it. And there's another one, which sounds quite interesting, and we should tell you more about it in a minute, if the animals may participate in investigations. If we start with injuries caused by animals, I've listed a number of the examples here, but you only have to look at the animals to see how easily they can cause injury. For example, the teeth here, the hefty looking teeth, belong to a domestic dog. On the other hand, in Africa, one doesn't have to emphasize or explain the damage that wildlife can do. In the middle top picture is an example of an injury from a crocodile. And then, of course, one either has to explain the hazards and dangers of being anywhere near a hippo.
And I'd like to say a word about the bottom picture that's marked with an arrow. This is one of 2 people who were found dead on the east coast of Kenya. They were British, their bodies were flown back to Britain, and I was asked to go to the mortuary and examine them because they were believed to have been attacked by wild animals. I've been involved in quite a lot of these sort of cases, both in East Africa and back here, but it is a reminder that what Margaret is saying about injuries caused by animals means that forensic investigators are looking at human beings as well as the animals themselves.
And then the injuries caused to animals. We can all remember examples of animals that have been injured. Again, I've listed some particular situations that that animals suffer. But the key thing in this particular issue is to decide whether the injury was intentional or accidental. If it's intentional, obviously a crime will be involved. For example, these two tortoises, the top one, that is a clear case of an offence. It's a poacher who's taken tortoises and now cutting them up. The lower case, one has to, is a road accident case. The tortoises were rushing across the road up near the equator in Kenya, and the traffic was trying to avoid them, but this one was definitely hit by a vehicle. What we can't work out now is whether that was an accident, the car couldn't stop, or whether they drove over the animal deliberately.
I'd like to draw hello. Does someone object to what we're saying? We can hear the rabble rousers in the background. I'd like to draw attention, the bottom row here, to the number of East Africans and Central Africans and West Africans who have given their lives protecting wildlife. Those of you who are Kenyans will recognize the plaque down there that said, in honor of Kenya's conservation heroes. You'll find this at the entrance to the Nairobi National Park. And when we wrote our book on gorillas, to the right of that in 2017, mainly about our work with the mountain gorillas in Rwanda, we dedicated the book in 4 different languages, in English, in French, in Swahili, and in Kinyarwanda, to those who died serving conservation and who had died as a result of that work. We now move on to animals as sentinels, which Mark mentioned. You all know what a sentinel is. It's like a guard. East Africans, again, top left, won't need to be reminded that vultures are, I hope you can all hear, it's very noisy.
Are we getting interference?
Is it us or is it you? No, okay. East Africans don't need to be reminded that vultures, top left, are important indicators, both of natural incidents, such as animals dying of infectious disease, whatever, but also, sad to relate, of poaching ones where animals may have been baited with poisons, and the Kenyans are very, very strong on this, and vultures subsequently are killed by that. Nearer to home here, the picture in the top there is actually Liverpool. It's the Runcorn Bridge, and all the dark area on the screen, the lower dark area in particular, as you can see some stretching up to the top, is what we call a murmuration of starlings. And these starlings are there in tens of thousands, and they serve as important indicators of the health of the environment, but also if there's any contamination, any poisoning, whatever, any starlings that are found dead or sick or whatever can be used, as I am in the top right picture here, looking at a starling, one of a number, not from the Runcorn Bridge, but one of a number that were killed when a building in the Midlands here in Britain blew up. Fortunately at night, no one was there. And the main evidence was what had happened to the starlings. And you can see the charred feathers, and I had to do detailed post-mortem examination of them. I'll move on to the next one, I think, and not say anything about the bottom row. Now, animals participating. Margaret drew attention to this. This is a very English, very British picture. And it is because it has Queen Elizabeth, our Queen, in red in the top row there. And why are we using this? Well, Queen Elizabeth fairly frequently gets on the train here in Norfolk at King's Lynn and travels to London. And this was one of those occasions. And of course, the press are out in large numbers, but we would point out there's apparently very little security. But there was, and you can see top left there, that Margaret is talking to a police officer on the platform who has a dog, and that dog was part of the defense in case of explosives or whatever. You're familiar with the story. And of course, dogs in particular have participated in crime detection, in finding of evidence, etc. For instance, so-called cadaver dogs that can find dead bodies, etc., etc. But it's not only dogs, and it's not only here in Western Europe and elsewhere in the so-called westernized world. If you move to the right of the slide, you'll see a picture here of a book about the African giant or pouched rat, written by a Cooper, but in this case, not one of us, it's by Dr. Ross Cooper, who came originally from Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. And this explains how giant rats have been used now for some years with little harnesses on them. They are trained to detect mines in minefields and various other tasks. And there are lots of other animals that participate in this way, and we consider them part of animal forensics.
Now we turn to the types of forensic investigation that can be carried out where there's a potential crime and a crime scene. And these investigate obvious things like why and how the animal died or was ill, and also questions of animal welfare and abuse. We've highlighted 3 of these topics because they're actually included in the sort of title and briefing for our lecture.
But I'm going to go straight into the circumstances of death, which is something I'm involved in mainly in animals, sometimes in humans. The questions we ask about circumstances of death, the usual standard ones, are on the left, and you can read them for yourselves: cause, mechanism, manner, etc. We find it much easier with our teaching and our international work when we've got a dead body, whatever it happens to be, to ask the questions: how did this animal die? Why did this animal die? When did this animal die? Where did it die? And who might have been involved? Determining the circumstances of death is very, very important. And you've got a lovely range of pictures here. We have to explain that we tend, I in particular, to give you a sort of photo extravaganza. Margaret doesn't always approve and tells me so, because we haven't got much time and we like to feel that you can at least see a range of pictures. Just like to draw your attention to 2 on the top row there. There are 2 field post-mortem examinations. The one in the middle at the top of one of a number of puppies that had died under strange circumstances here in England on a farm. And the top right, a post-mortem examination of a go-away bird with our colleague, Dr. Maureen Kamau, who may or may not be listening in. But if Fardosa Hassan is, she said she would yesterday in an email. She is the person who organises most of what we do at Impala Research Centre, and we really are most grateful, Fardosa, to Nashukuru. And the only other picture I want to put in, because then we can mention his name, is right in the middle. There is Laban Njoroge, who is the head of entomology at the National Museums of Kenya, and he's examining with a lens a dead butterfly being held by his colleague, Mr. Mike Clifton, another eminent entomologist, doing their work down at the coast on a workshop that we were involved in, helped organise a couple of years ago. And then there's the question of when did the animal die? This is to ascertain the post-mortem interval, because that's very important in forensic cases. And the main point I want to make here is that anyone who is doing any sort of forensic work, but particularly wildlife forensic work, needs to have the eyes and the ears of a naturalist. And the 2 flamingos on the left are an example. They were 2 amongst hundreds that we were looking at some years ago at Lake Bogoria in Kenya, when they were suffering what the Americans call die-offs in large numbers. But the top flamingo, you can see, looks fresh, freshly dead, as indeed it is. It's even got a wound with some blood in it. The lower one looks, to all intents and purposes, as if it's just mummified, and to a certain extent it is. But anyone who's working on this would understand, oh, flamingos live in alkaline lakes on the equator. It's quite understandable, the post-mortem change that lower one is showing. And I should say, it's really I've been very, just this morning actually, to find a paper. It's just come out, it was sent to me, in the journal Science and Justice, and it's about studies in Hawaii. And these are showing that it's important to know about wildlife and local fauna if you are going to investigate the scavenging of carcasses, the scavenging of cadavers. And of course, in Hawaii, they've had a terrible time. Many of those are human. So an understanding and interest in natural history is really very, very important, especially if you're doing wildlife. There are certain taxa, certain groups of animals that are automatically, in our opinion, high-profile species. We'll be talking about birds of prey, raptors later. You'll see the odd picture of marine mammals, and there are others in this high-profile category. Our own experience in this and our awareness of it dates back to our time with the mountain gorillas, 1993, 94, 95 in Rwanda. And you can see pictures here taken at that time. And the reason for doing this is because if a mountain gorilla or any other gorilla, but particularly mountain gorillas, is found dead or sick, it becomes international news very, very quickly. So high-profile species probably needs a forensic investigation. And the three pictures, top right and the first two on the left, lower ones, are pictures of from the 4 dead mountain gorillas that I and colleagues had to examine post-mortem, very decomposed, as you can see. But the skull, bottom picture, in the middle picture on the bottom row, shows very characteristic spear and arrow marks. Incidentally, the spear mark has lots of little maggots in it. And these had been killed by spears, by arrows, and dogs used by local people. So that was an exciting case, but a very sad one, and very definitely high profile.
Many people have worked with the mountain gorillas since that time, but we would particularly like to mention Dr. Gladys Lemmer from Uganda, who has a remarkable project up at Windy, adjacent to the mountain gorillas. In her project, she integrates gorilla health care with the community health in the villages in Burundi, all around the area where the mountain gorillas live.
We now move on to the next heading, and that was the circumstances of ill health, because animals can sometimes be ill or appear to be ill because of some nefarious action. Someone's done something maliciously or perhaps accidentally, but it is likely to be an offence, unlawful. The examination of animals that are alive is generally the remit of the veterinary surgeon, the veterinarian, and I'm not going to say very much about that here, but obviously other disciplines play a part. And of course, if all else fails, I'm bound to say this as I'm a pathologist, look at the 2 arrows there. If all else fails, you'll probably get the answer at post-mortem examination, whether it's worms in a snake's lung or below that, flukes, another sort of worm, of course, in the stomach of a buffalo. Laboratory investigations are part and parcel of all animal forensic investigations where there are live or dead animals actually involved and samples can be taken. I put here a selection of pictures showing the whole range, everything from DNA technology right through to cytology and bacteriology, hair examination. Don't forget, laboratory investigation may involve plants such as pollen. Look at the arrow bottom right there. And of course, diatoms. You can see a picture of a diatom there. Diatoms are microalgae, they're plants. Their role in diagnosing drowning seems to have come under some criticism recently, but they are everywhere in the environment and they are very, very important indicators and clues in forensic investigations.
Now, animal welfare we've flagged up already. It is one of the major causes of prosecutions that call for forensic evidence. And when I say welfare, I'm actually talking about this corollary causing animal suffering or cruelty. And I've explained a list of these typical incidents here. But they're illustrated in these pictures. And one of the points is that basically animal welfare applies mainly to the animals that are actually dependent on us. So primarily domesticated animals, But also, once wildlife comes into captivity, then they are also have a benefit of welfare legislation protection. So we have some examples here on the far left. We have Dr. Jessica Kerere, a young Kenyan veterinarian, looking after a baby elephant at the Retete Elephant Sanctuary. In the middle there, the word marabou stork with only one wing. You can imagine that, and this is in Uganda, how dependent that bird is on its for its welfare on the person who looks after it. And then we have a third case from Africa, the little chimpanzee. This was a smuggling case across the border from the Congo into Rwanda. And our Rwandan counterpart went down to examine the chimpanzee, and he said, you know, this is just like a refugee child. Look at its swollen stomach. Now, this case actually illustrates the point of that, in fact, a case like this involves not just one type of crime. There would be a crime of smuggling against the laws against CITES. There's the internal wildlife conservation laws of the two countries and a welfare law. So that is often the case where animals are involved. But what I can't explain is why the prof should be in the picture plus a cup of tea.
That's the picture bottom right there. I can explain it. First of all, I want the listeners, our colleagues, to realise that I may be a veterinary pathologist, but I do like live animals. I prefer them live, and I do genuinely care for them. And secondly, being an English veterinary pathologist, I need a regular cup of tea or coffee. But the main thing is, I just wish I had a decent sized bottle like Dr. Jessica's there, rather than a small mug.
Now, and animal welfare law is very important to support these offences of causing suffering or cruelty to animals. A lot of countries in the world have that legislation. I've marked up the title of your own Kenyan cruelty legislation here. And I've also detailed some of the two key elements of our own legislation, which is actually quite a modern approach to dealing with animals. There are obviously offences of causing unnecessary suffering or cruelty, it's often called still, to animals when the event has actually happened. But in the attempt to prevent cruelty or unnecessary suffering arising, our legislation, which is derived from laws, which is a principle, this was started in New Zealand in 1999, and this is the duty of care. And this imposes a responsibility on the person looking after the animal to provide these 5 elements for their welfare in the attempt to stop the animal, any suffering arising.
I'm not going to say much about this partly because of time, and partly because it's a concept that is at the moment is very much a Western one, if you'll excuse my saying that. And this is the apparent link, not in all cases, between people doing unpleasant things to humans and unpleasant things, violence, abuse to animals. It's something that will gradually attract attention, I think, in East Africa, but we'll say no more about it at the moment, but colleagues ought to be aware of this link.
And then the other area of law, which actually requires an awful lot of forensic evidence, is wildlife crime. And this is widespread, it's very widely known in Africa, of course, but occurs all over the world. We have here an example on the left, a very British or European species, the badger. This animal was widely persecuted and populations were dropping until, in Britain at least, it was given its own, if you like, personal legislation protecting its welfare. And now the populations have risen again, which demonstrates the value of wildlife legislation. It doesn't simply cover obvious animals such as the pictures on the right. It covers all creatures great and small, generally speaking. And also it covers plants, for example, this protected flower here, And also there is an environmental laws to protect the environment, because if that water in the picture on the left-hand side is polluted, the entire wildlife around it, the animals and the plants, will be affected. And pollution very often covers major die-offs of fish and other species in such localities.
And I'd just like to say a word about the top picture on the right with the arrow. This is a picture taken in February 2019, again up at Impala near Nanyuki. And you can see where the arrow is there, that this Grevy's zebra, which has a fold of foot behind it there, has got a lesion there, a wound, and that is in fact a snare attached to it. And this is perhaps more the sort of traditional wildlife crime. I'm pleased to say that our colleagues at Impala Research Centre, together with another colleague from Nanyuki, from the veterinary department, from KWS, were able to remove the snare. We've got funny noises on the screen, but as long as you're not protesting, we'll carry on. Okay.
So wildlife law is very absolutely essential to deal with wildlife incidents and to protect populations. Most countries in the world have legislation. I've made a note of your Kenya wildlife law, which you're probably extremely well aware. And of course, the other East African countries have comparable legislation. I've used a illustration from my own country of the sort of things that wildlife legislation protects animals from.
Okay.
And then I have another example, which I thought you might find interesting. And this is a typical wildlife scene and a crime scene. We have here a bird, and we have a gunshot wound. So we might say immediately, oh, wildlife crime scene, we must call that the forensic specialist. But we do have to ask a number of other questions first. This particular incident took place in Uruguay on an estancia, a private land. But where we're investigating this, we might say, now, is the species protected or not? And then we would say, well, if it's not protected, there's no crime here. Might look at the location. Was it shot in a protected area? Because very often a national park or a wildlife protected area will say you can't take or kill animals in that area. And then we might ask, what season of the year was this? Because in many cases, birds are protected during the breeding season if they're not protected outside. And then with all said and done, we find if you say there's no, the animal, we decide whether it's protected or it's not, you might say, well, what about a permit? Even if this is protected, did the person have a permit to do this? And then we move on to the CITES. I don't think that needs any further explanation here, but basically it manages the movement of endangered species listed on the convention from one country to another. What is important to remember, it just doesn't just apply to live animals. We know very well examples such as ivory tusks and rhino horn, but the wealth of other things which are covered by CITES. And we can see some worked ivory in that middle picture, and a typical tourist artifact with the snake skin. These are items that have been confiscated under CITES legislation. But other species are on there as well. You see these corals on the left. They're being examined at the London Zoo and identified. It may apply to wood, sometimes to carvings if rare wood is used. But the key thing for forensic scientists is to remember that even the samples that they take from a case that they are investigating, if they're going to send those samples to be processed in another country, they also have to have a CITES permit.
One aspect of this that I'm very interested in, the bottom pictures there with two arrows, is the investigation of old collections. This will appeal to some of our colleagues who we see have joined us from the National Museums of Kenya. For example, I'm holding on the left a box of birds' eggs there, very old collection. Were they taken legally? Are they legal now, etc.? And my colleague, Dr. Pat Morris on the right, is admiring one of a number of specimens, taxidermy specimens. So this is interesting work. It involves veterinarians, biologists, Pat Morris is a biologist, and many other disciplines, including, as I say, our colleagues in the museum world. Now, this is put in here because it's about halfway through. This is put to wake you up in case any of you are snoozing, because we can't tell on the screen. And this is, and they're quite nice pictures, we think. These are radiographs, these X-rays, but they're strictly called radiographs, digital ones, taken actually here in Britain at the University of Cambridge Veterinary School of 2 East African species. The Nile crocodile on the left and a leopard tortoise. Margaret showed you pictures of a leopard tortoise earlier. And these are examples of the information that we can get from radiography of who might have prepared a particular specimen in a private collection or a museum. And you can see the wires and the other contraptions inside these that give some indication of, give a very good indication, almost like a fingerprint of the person who did the preparation. Now, I am aware that many of you young East Africans will say, what about DNA, Mzee? We can do DNA on everything. And I've no doubt you can, but it costs money. And to be honest, DNA technology is less fun than doing straightforward morphology, looking at specimens, taking X-rays, etc. It's a lot cheaper and a lot more fun. And in case you doubt it, thinking, oh, it's just old John Cooper saying it, look at this reference at the bottom. This paper has just come out from Pepper W. Trail, November 2021. Morphological analysis, that means looking at identifying the species, looking at structure and so on, a powerful tool in wildlife forensic biology. So don't get carried away by DNA. It has its place, but so also do many other techniques.
Now, we've got to the stage of the presentation of evidence. As I see it, there's a sort of forensic pathway that travels from the original crime scene, such as the bird that we've been looking at, to collecting the specimens, which we've also seen in the course of this. Then you've collected the evidence, you've got to look after it, and you've got to use it, because eventually it will turn up at the end of the forensic pathway in court. And we're going to talk about these elements here. First of all, the record keeping. And it's very important to remember that even in this digital age, handwritten notes are essential. They are called contemporaneous notes and are generally have to be produced in court at the end of the pathway.
And you see 3 examples there, including writing on a blackboard in a human mortuary. I want to say a word about photography with particular reference to the picture top right there. That's a scene from the National Museums of Kenya, just up the road from Nature Kenya. And it shows our friend and colleague, Professor Arthur Kamoli, Dr. Ogeto Mwebi, and we hope both of them may be listening in today, etc., and one of their staff and myself, and we're doing forensic investigations of gorilla material here. But the reason for putting this in is not just to show an interdisciplinary investigation, but to make the point that Professor Kamoli has an excellent camera there, and he takes it along to get proper photographs. I do the same. I carry a camera so that I can get proper photos. And why I say that is because although most of you East Africans will have these wonderful modern smartphones, I just have a Mulika Mwizi, as it's called in Swahili, a straightforward Nokia telephone, and I can't take photographs on it. The message here, apart from the fact that I'm old-fashioned and like not to be traceable, is that photography is very, very important. And if you've got a smartphone and you're involved in something that might end up being a crime scene, get photos there and then.
Another aspect that is of evidence that is all important is the chain of custody, also known as the chain of evidence. And the chain is there to illustrate the fact that you have to have documentation that accounts for every single transfer of the evidence from one person to another until it reaches the courts.
So an example at the bottom here, on the left, I'm collecting some dead seals that were found dead under strange circumstances off the coast here in Norfolk, England. And I've got my piece of paper, I've signed for receipt of them. Then they get to the Cambridge University Veterinary School, middle picture, and the post-mortem attendant is receiving the bags, and she also signs that she's received them. And finally, or not finally, the next one on the picture on the right, one of my young pathology colleagues is opening up the bags, and he also signs, confirms that he's received them. And that's a simple example of how we're trying to maintain the chain of custody. As far as sampling is concerned, it's a subject in itself. I'm not going to say too much because of time, but you can see the stages of sampling on the left, and you can see examples on the slide here of sampling both in the lab and in the field. The one in the field is the bottom picture there, and that's an enormous 13-meter whale, dead Broders whale, that we post-mortemed in Trinidad when we were working there. And you can see samples being taken in exactly the same way as in the lab.
Now, it's very obvious that taking samples is a risky business, particularly when you're in the field. And it is very wise to make a risk assessment first to evaluate what hazards you're going to have to meet and how you're going to take those precautions. The 5 steps I've illustrated there is a very simple technique, which comes from British law, but could be used anywhere, whether there's health and safety legislation as in Kenya, or if there is none.
And 3 examples in pictures on the right, again taken on our last workshop at Impala Research Centre in October 2019, which incidentally Susan Underkoffler mentioned earlier was with us and gave an excellent lecture on forensics. The top one is where a dead cow is being delivered for post-mortem examination, and we're all there with our notebooks and our paperwork and so on, finding out about it and ascertaining how safety measures, as Margaret says. Bottom left is when we were doing the post-mortem examination and tissues are being examined prior to being put into a nice little red container, red being a sign of pathogens or possible danger there. And then bottom right, Margaret Cooper is with the cooks at Impala, and we've checked that the meat from the cow is safe to eat, and she's just checking that health and safety is followed there as well. Now, what about further information about forensics and particularly about wildlife forensics? We apologize for showing 2 of our own books on the left and in the middle there. These are the ones we published in 2007 and 2013. But we do so not because they were written by John and Margaret Cooper, but because we really tried in those books to give an international orientation to this subject. So you will find in both books reference to many different countries. You will find references, cited literature in other languages, in French, in German, in Afrikaans, whatever it happens to be. And to be honest, that many forensic publications are too parochial. They are too national. Some of those about veterinary forensics only say about the United States, or perhaps a particular part of the United States, or a particular part of Europe. But an exception to that is this volume on veterinary pathology, a special volume, a special focus one in 2016, which again, we like to say, like our books, is truly international. And of course, you can get further information on the internet. And we've just listed 1 or 2 organizations here. PAW here in Britain, the Wildlife Forensic Academy. And we do hope that Mr. Andrew Voss, the founder of the Wildlife Forensic Academy, is tuned in. He wrote to us yesterday and gave us very good news about this. It's based in South Africa, and it's wonderful to think that this initiative will serve the world, of course, but particularly, first and foremost, serve Africa. And then the Society for Wildlife Forensic Science at the bottom.
I hope you can spot in the middle book the picture on the cover, the background picture on the cover, which was taken from at Lake Bogoria.
we miss all these lovely things in East Africa, so we have to make up for it by putting them on our books and our lectures. What has been published in East Africa, you might ask? Well, the answer is not a lot on forensics. This, however, was a pioneer book published 20 years ago by our friend Dr. Alex Olumbe, who is a medical forensic pathologist, who published lots of papers as well, as you can see down there, who unfortunately is now working and doing a super job in Australia. When we met Alex 20 years ago, you can see the picture there of us at coffee. We were actually talking about a human case in which an animal had been involved. He not only gave us a copy of his book, but he wrote inside it, "Dear John and Margaret, etc. Let's hope that this book will lead to something comparable on the veterinary, on the animal side. And unless we've missed it, nothing has come out in 20 years. So we do put out a plea to our East African colleagues. Why don't you produce a publication? We'll help you with it if necessary, but it must come from you." The other aspect we want to mention is that forensic studies are often overlapping with other disciplines, and we're just going to give two examples. The first one is paleopathology, top left, which I'm interested in because I do a lot of bone examination, and I learn a lot from these texts that are in fact about old bones and old tissues, but where the system is very, very good. East African viewers, particularly in Kenya and Tanzania, won't need to be reminded that Dr. Louis Leakey and his wife and two subsequent generations of Leakeys have contributed so much to our knowledge, our understanding of paleontology, and in their way opened the door to a forensic approach to it. And this was brought very clearly to us, the bottom two pictures, when we were in South Africa a few years ago, when we met Professor Philip Tobias on the left, another eminent African paleontologist, and he allowed us to look at and examine the Tung skull. You see us with Dr. Ron Clark there examining it. Recent research has shown that almost certainly this Tung child, it's the skeleton of a child, 2 or 3 million years old, that this body had been predated by a bird of prey, as monkeys are still in Africa, and taken to the nest. And we put a couple of references, websites down below.
And on the right-hand side is a brand new book, hot off the press this summer, and it deals with wildlife biodiversity conservation, but the author, the editors, Susan Undercoffer, who we mentioned when we were talking about that picture outside the United Kenya Club, and also her colleague Hayley Adams, have put forward an argument for the integration of the forensic principle into wildlife biodiversity conservation. And we're very honoured to have had a chapter each in this book.
There is also a need, we believe, in East Africa for more meetings, for more conferences. We organised with East African friends, this one in 10 years ago, and you can see a number of people, including Dr. Mwebi, top left there, and Laban and Jeroge and others. It was a great success, many, many more registrants than we expected, but we would like politely to say, isn't there a need to hold more of these in the future? We subsequently, 2 years later, ran one on birds of prey, also at the vet labs, at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at Kabete in Kenya. And the reason for bringing this in is because, as we said earlier, some species, some taxa are high profile, and birds of prey, very, very often, a dead bird of prey, an injured bird of prey is likely to be a legal case and therefore will require a forensic input.
And finally, well, we are reaching the end of the forensic pathway. You might say you hadn't come to a Nature Kenya talk to see a picture of an English court. This is rather modern courtroom, but the elements are still there, whatever country you are in. But we, in the course of this, I would like to bring out a couple of points before I make the final remarks. That the are two important elements, the difference between criminal law and civil law, both of which there can be cases involving animals. Criminal law, of which we would imagine as sort of poaching cases and so on, start with an offence and finish up with punishments and fines. Whereas in civil law, these are claims between people. When an animal has injured a person or damaged property, you claim compensation. We have two types of witnesses that come to court, two main types. The witness of fact, someone who has observed a crime scene or a crime has occurred, and the expert witness who has done all the forensic work and has written a report and bringing that to court. And then finally, the witnesses have to present their evidence to the court. This is the final part of the pathway, the reason why all this work, the forensic work, has been done. And this is, it may be one thing to present your actual evidence, that may very well go smoothly, but the tough piece is the challenges which come when you are being cross-examined. And therefore, it is absolutely essential that all the forensic work you have done up to that point, the evidence that you've taken must be perfectly documented and absolutely watertight. And even then, it may not be finished because the press may be waiting for you outside.
As they were for me in the bottom right picture. And this is when I appeared in a coroner's court here in Britain in a case involving a young man who was alleged to have been killed by a python, by a pet python. And it's not just that. East African colleagues will understand there are sometimes political implications in court cases. Even here in Britain, we have animal activists who can be quite unpleasant if they don't like the outcome of a case or what someone like me has said as an expert witness. So as Margaret says, it's not all over once you come out of that courtroom. Now, we have worked overseas in many countries, as you know. We've enjoyed it very much, but we've become very aware that you have to expect the unexpected. And that's very true of wildlife forensics. It might be the terrain, top left, the desert. It might be the species like the whale. It might be a shortage of transport. Two pictures there, Margaret and myself using local transport on the coast of Kenya. It may be very unexpected to some people, but perhaps not to us, such as the middle picture with the arrow. When we were working in Tanzania, we found a dead buffalo. We thought, this is strange. We ought to get students from the university to come up with us and find out why it died. When we came back 2 hours later to the buffalo, it looked rather different from when we first found it. How was it different? Well, when we first saw it, it had 4 legs. When we came back, it had only 1 leg. Now, no East African listening to this will be surprised. And you're probably saying nyama, 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 which is, of course, Swahili, Bantu language for meat. And that, of course, was what has happened. 3 of the legs have been taken off. And one lives with those sort of things. But whether you're working in East Africa or the Caribbean or whatever, you have to be versatile. You see a picture to the right of that of field work being carried out, for example, and computers that don't always work very well, not just in East Africa, even in north of Scotland, here in Britain. But we would like to draw your attention to the bottom right picture there. This was a workshop that we were running in Uganda, and it was about great apes, and we were doing post-mortem work and looking at tissues. Unfortunately, we found that we only had 1 pair of strong rubber gloves, the yellow gloves there. We didn't know what to do, but our colleagues decided the best thing was to share the gloves. So here you have one Tanzanian on the left with 1 glove and a Ugandan on the right with the other glove. And the really nice thing about this was not only the collaboration between these 2, but they came from 2 different countries. One was a Muslim and one was a Christian. And we felt that was a wonderful message for this very, very troubled world that we're in at the moment. We're aware, Richard, we're coming to a close now. We're aware it's a bit over an hour, but we're also aware that we started a bit late. We're going to conclude now. Animal forensics, as we put it over to you today, we would argue is not only a rapidly expanding field, it's very much interdisciplinary and it's international. It's a subject that requires good science, a sense of curiosity, and competent detective work. And we'd like to say a little bit more about that last one. Curiosity and detective work. It comes back to what we were saying earlier about natural history. It's so appropriate that this meeting is hosted by Nature Kenya, that goes back to 1909 and has trained so many people, both in colonial times and subsequently, in natural history. And what we've done in our life, top row of pictures here, is to both ourselves to be interested in the environment here in Britain, to teach our grandchildren. You can see them there fishing, looking for creatures. You can see our grandson in the middle who's caught and is handling a harmless snake here in Britain. And look, this picture was taken very recently of our youngest granddaughter learning to use a hand lens, and she's going to look at her pet guinea pig. I like to think she's emulating her grandfather on the right, who's using a lens in East Africa to look at a chameleon. We apply this question of curiosity to our students here in Britain, bottom left. Even visiting one of London's famous museums, we get them interested in what they're seeing in the pots and specimen jars and so on. And you can see there's some happy students there. And we apply it to our online course for the University of Florida. There's some websites there, far too much for anyone to read, but you'll find it online, where again, we encourage our students to be interested in the natural world. But this enthusiasm, this curiosity, this feeling I want to discover things is not restricted to England. It is everywhere, and particularly we would argue in East Africa. Bottom picture, middle picture, sorry, bottom row, middle picture. Here again is our dear friend, Dr. Ageto Mwebi, in his element. He's in the National Museums of Kenya, addressing a group of people, and look at his glee as he shows them a gorilla skull. This is what it's all about. And the bottom far right picture was taken at the Nairobi Snake Park and is a reminder to Margaret and myself of the great enthusiasm shown by these young Kenyans who call themselves the Snake Charmers, headed by Dr. Jessica Kareri and Jacinta Chege, we've got it right, and encouraging young Kenyans to take an interest in snakes and other reptiles, which is very much a modern development. So in closing, Bwana Chairman, Mwenyekiti, and ladies and gentlemen, we want to say thank you and finish. We've emphasized the international nature of this work, and so it seems appropriate that we should put on different languages. I'm sorry we can't put more of them. But as we're addressing the East African Natural History Society through Nature Kenya, we think it's appropriate that we say Asante Sana.
Wow. Thank you very much, Professor John and Margaret Cooper, for that very insightful presentation. In fact, you have really opened a new different world in the wildlife forensics. It has been very educational and very informative. So I think quickly we will check what's happening in the chat box. And if there is any concern, any question that will need your intervention, I will let you know. So from Helen Jeffries, hello, John and Margaret. Valerie sends greetings and apologies for not being able to be here. I think apologies accepted. Jean Claude, hello, Coopers. Greetings from Rwanda. Wow, that's a land of 1,000 hills and million smiles.
Yeah, but Richard, your French is not very good. You should be saying Jean-Claude, not Jean-Claude.
It's Jean.
It's like Jean.
Invite Jean-Claude. He'll give you an invitation and he'll improve your French pronunciation.
Richard, can we stop sharing now? Can we stop sharing the screen?
It can still remain that way, no problem.
Thank you.
Yes, from Isaac Mulenga, greetings from Zambia.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Nahason Kiania. Nahason from the National Museum is present. He's in the house. Great. Karibu sana.
Santazana.
Yes, Winfrida from Wildlife and Forensic Laboratory is also present.
Mm-hmm.
Good. That's very nice.
Odile from Nanyuki. I did a course in Poland forensics some times ago, but looking forward to this talk, which has really been very informative. Welcome.
Thank you.
Duncan Japit. Okay, I have a question concerning animal welfare, which I saw you talked about animal welfare. Here in Kenya, domesticated animals like donkeys are being treated badly by overloading and overworking and being beaten, especially by those using them to transport water and luggages. How should we go about this? Thanks.
This is a very long-standing problem. We can remember going back to when we first came to Kenya in the 70s. The Kenya Society for Protection of Animals was concerned with this. At times, prosecutions may be taken, but in actual fact, it's much better if education can be given before it gets to such a crisis point, which a prosecution is always doubtful whether it will succeed or not. The fundamental thing is to recognize the problem and to provide education. And I think that there are organizations that like the and the KSPCA and other organizations operating, I think there's a donkey, the donkey sanctuary and so on. They operate in Kenya and in other countries. And if they can provide education, it's much better deal with the root cause, which may just simply be not understanding how it works. If you overwork an animal, eventually you will lose it. Whereas if you look after it, it will give back to you if you look after it properly.
And can we just say that, joking apart about pronunciation, and I apologize, Richard, Jean-Claude, funny noises here. Jean-Claude Massangesho, who has kindly sent in a message, one of our colleagues in Rwanda has set up the RAWO, which is an animal welfare charity there in Rwanda, and we give him what help we can. But your questioner might find it useful to contact Jean-Claude and see if they might work together. If Jean-Claude wants to put in his email address on the chat, then of course anyone else can contact him as well. It's Jean-Claude Massangesho and his organization is RAWO.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think Jean-Claude can drop his email on the chat box so that the participants can pick it up from there. From Benjamin Kennedy, I strongly agree. DNA, wonderful technology, but it's only part of the picture. We lose something by not using all the tools in the toolbox.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Can we just say here before people start leaving, it's lovely to have greetings and to see the names of lots of people that we know in lots of different countries. And we'd like to thank you very much for them, for tuning in and sending messages. It's warmed our hearts because really we do feel a bit stuck in Britain. We wish we were in Africa.
Yeah, and can we also thank people like Roger Fail, who are in North America, in his case Canada, in Ontario, who got up so early this morning to hear us talk, and we just hope it's not been a great disappointment. But it's absolutely wonderful that people from the New World have even got up early to attend from Nature Kenya. Asante sana.
Okay, thank you very much. Another from Ada Kemoli. Thank you, John and Margaret, for the invite to attend your fantastic presentation. I agree with you on documentation and photography. Both are fun.
Thank you very much. We saw you come into the lecture.
Great. From Nahason, thank you for the invite. I'm just wondering whether we can bring forensic entomology into wildlife investigations. It's not covered in the presentation.
Yes, it was only not covered because we were short of time. Our friend Laban and Jirogit, whom we showed a picture, and others, of course, are doing this on a regular basis, and we certainly include it in our lecture normally. Yes, forensic entomology is very, very important, and it's not just insects, other invertebrates. And if Laban or any other entomologist is is listening in, perhaps they could put a message on the chat, either to give their email address or to comment on this. It is a vital part of most investigations. I love doing it, but I'm only an amateur entomologist.
Thank you. Marlene Reid, asante sana wewe.
Asante sana pia.
Karibu.
From Barbara Ongori, awesome presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Arispa Assemble, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Karibu sana. From George Owiti, great presentation, Professor John and Margaret Cooper, and thanks for the challenge.
Yeah, that's definitely there. And it's so nice to see that you're listeing.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, get Professor Owiti to write a book and we'll all contribute to it.
He's the man to go to.
Mugwi Manjuguna, excellent, asante. From Benjamin Kennedy, very good presentation, Coopers. It was good to listen to as I organize my slides.
Oh,
Great.
very good.
Benjamin Kennedy is a veterinary colleague, and I know we have a large collection of slides, and he's like us, is always doing two things at once. In his case, probably several things at once. So it's good that he tuned in as well. Thank you.
And he's a vet who's very interested in invertebrates, which is quite unusual.
Great. From Leonidas Mumburi, greetings from Tanzania, working on gray crown crane from Nature Tanzania. Happy to join the meeting, really appreciated.
And sisi pia kwa sababu ametoka Tanzania, tunataka kusema karibu sana bwana, lakini mimi ninagopa sana kwa sababu Kiswahili changu si kizuri kama Kiswahili cha Tanzania. You understand that, Richard? I've just said, because our questioner comes from Tanzania, I'm very worried because their Swahili is so good and they don't have British accents like me. But mimi napenda sana Tanzania, kwa hivyo yeye amenifurahisha sana. Asante sana kwa maneno yako.
You've got a good command of Swahili language too. From Rupi Margaret, yes, there is an increase in case of raptors being electrocuted in Kenya due to badly designed concrete electric poles. Many are on sites, Appendix 1. Can there be a case of making these poles illegal with forensics to prove that they are electrocuted by concrete poles for electricity?
This is from Kenya, is it the question?
Yeah.
It's from Kenya. It's from Kenya.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. Thanks. Didn't realize. There's funny noise on screen. Yes, of course. This has been investigated in many other parts of the world, including Southern Africa and North America and Europe. But of course, there is quite a large bird of prey conservation presence in Kenya through the Peregrine Fund. Dr. Garcia Garda is part of that, of course. So I think this is something we could talk about, but there is a need, most certainly, to design such things better so that raptors are not unnecessarily killed or in some cases electrocuted.
Okay. From Odile Keane, again, amazing presentation, sparked my curiosity all over again. I did oceanology, particularly of interest, our now nearly depleted mollusks on our Kenyan reefs.
Mollusks.
Oh, that's mollusks, is it? That's wonderful to hear that, because invertebrates are often overlooked. You know, we think about the butterflies because they're so beautiful, but we forget the other ones that are perhaps not so popular. Yes, we don't have answers to all these things. I think the Cooper's approach is to say to our East African colleagues, bring a forensic approach to trying to find out why species are disappearing. You can do it with birds, as you know, Richard, you know why certain birds have declined in Taita Hills or whatever it happens to be. And you can do the same with invertebrates. Keep proper records, consult people, keep records over a period of time, because it might, of course, be associated with climate change or environment or agricultural practices. All we can say is to encourage you, all of this is part of the forensic method.
Thank you. Rhoda Ondieki, a very informative presentation, listening from Baringo.
Oh, great.
Wonderful. Yes.
Yes.
Mel Chapman, got to go back to teaching. Thank you. Thank you too. Jean Claude, I've already shared all the details in there. I think anyone who is, who would like to can copy from there. Margaret, I think your question has now been addressed. From Elias Minor, thanks Professor John and Margaret Cooper for the great presentation, very informative. From Dismas Kipkemei, very informative, great. Thanks Margaret and John. Following from Nandi, Kenya.
Oh, very good. Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Okay, someone who logged in from his mobile phone, very educative. I'm from Naivasha, where the human is taking all what is left for animals. We have giraffes, zebras, impalas, etc. walking on the road and being killed by pros for Nyama and by road users. Can KWS Naivasha come in and help on this?
Yes, I think yes.
And Naivasha has, of course, the KWS, Kenya Wildlife Service training station. And of course, for a while, Professor Owiti was director of that. We were most impressed by what we saw when we went up there, and hopefully they will play some part in ameliorating the situation, because as your questioner says, Naivasha is being overrun by humans and animals are very much taking second place.
John, can I explain something a little bit about Naivasha? I just want to inform you that Naivasha KWS Training Institute has now been changed to Wildlife and Research Training Institute. That is now the new institute. Beginning this year, it's now under the new act, through the Wildlife Act. It's now Wildlife Research and Training Institute, Naivasha.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And someone here says, thank you very much. You are a Swahili man.
That is a compliment. My Swahili is not very good now, but I learned it first in Tanzania during the Azimio la Arusha. That's the Arusha Declaration. And I actually met President Julius Nyerere. So I always think he may be watching me and seeing if I'm still remembering my good Swahili. The answer is I remember it, but I don't always get it right. But asante sana, ninashukuru.
Okay, thank you. From Lawrence Ngugi, thank you very much, Coopers. And last from Georgina Harris, listening from Thika, Kenya. Your presentation was interesting and inspiring, fascinating work. There is so much to learn. Thank you both very, very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay, I think we have gone through all the concerns in the chat box, and indeed this has been a very interactive, very informative and educative presentation. To the presenters of today, thank you very much, and we look forward to another one like this in some times to come. We'll of course organize one. And to everyone who also created time to join us this particular afternoon, we are really indeed very grateful. I have shared a link in the chat box for the new invited guests, which you can join us becoming members of Nature Kenya. We work together the conservation journey. And also to welcome each and every one of you, those who are in Nairobi, that our Wednesday bird walks are still on. And this Sunday is our Sunday bird watch. We are going to Kakuzi near Makuyu. That's where we are doing our Sunday bird watch. Next week on Wednesday, which will be on 24th of November, we'll be here at the Nairobi National Museum grounds and Michuki Memorial Park. And after that, we will release the birding updates for the month of December through our NatureNet newsletter, which will be shared with you towards the course of the month. Otherwise, thank you very much. We are so grateful. Asante sana.
Asante sana for looking after us as well and for chairing so well. And also to Gloria for setting up the whole system and communications and so on. It's been a great honor to talk to Nature Kenya. And it's all we can do at the moment. We're stuck in Britain, but we're with you in spirit on your bird walks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we can leave at our own pleasure. I will just request that the presenters that we remain behind. We have work to chat after this. Thank you very much, everyone.